All righty. I think we're live now. Here we go. So, hi everyone and welcome. I'm Lindsay Benitez, founder of Lindsay B Coaching and a certified coach and speaker with a mission to empower confident and authentic leaders to design their dream careers and lives. In this LinkedIn Live series, it's my third one now, I'll be bringing fellow founders, first generation trailblazers, and just incredible people who have inspired me throughout my journey that I know will inspire you. If you have any questions throughout this live, put it in the comments, or if you're going to watch the replay, same thing, put it in the comments. We'll answer some questions. And I'd like to introduce my guest today, Dr. Joel Perez. Before I read your bio and share more about who you are, how are you feeling today? And don't just say, I'm good, I'm fine, or busy. Everyone says that. How are you really feeling?
Yeah, today, tomorrow I'm getting ready I have a workshop I'm facilitating tomorrow. And so part of me is feeling a little bit anxious about that,
Okay.
just to make sure I have the content ready. Some of you may know, right, when you're doing workshops or facilitating, there is a bit of a heightened anxiety as you get ready to make sure you have everything ready to go so you show up prepared. So a little bit anxious today at this moment.
Thank you for sharing that. And it is interesting, right? No matter how many of these we do, there's always the got to be prepared, maybe some butterflies on the stomach, but you got this. Excited to hear how it goes. So a little bit about Dr. Joel Perez. He's a dynamic executive and leadership coach, speaker, consultant, and founder of Apoyo Coaching and Consulting. Joel is a trusted expert in identity conscious leadership and cultural humility development. His 20 plus years of leadership experience in higher education positions him as a coach who deeply understands organizational challenges and opportunities. Joel is the author of Dear White Leader, How to Achieve Organizational Excellence Through Cultural Humility, a thought-provoking book that equips leaders to drive meaningful change at the personal, organizational, and community levels. And this is super cool, Joel, to share. The book was recently honored with the Silver Award for Best New Voice, Nonfiction, by the Independent Book Publishers Association, recognizing its powerful relevance and impact in today's leadership landscape. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Joel is dedicated to empowering leaders and organizations to achieve their goals while fostering a culture of impact and inclusion through cultural humility. And with his guidance, leaders transform their visions into thriving realities, which is exactly why we're here today to have this conversation. So Joel and I actually recently met through ICF LA. So shout out to the LA chapter and a coaching group. And we've had a couple different conversations since then. And what I've always admired is that while a lot of people are shying away from these types of conversations about DEI, inclusion, cultural humility, what that even means, we're both doubling down. So I couldn't think of anyone better to have this conversation around authentic inclusion. So thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's good to be. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation, and looking forward to this conversation, and really excited for it.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm going to jump right in. We titled this Authentic Inclusion. So I kind of said this in my beginning of my introduction and in your bio. We both want to empower leaders and empower authentic leaders, right? But when we hear this phrase authentic inclusion, what comes up for you? Would you define that?
Yeah, that's a good question, because a lot of times we throw terms around, right, without really spending time defining them, or expanding on them so people fully understand. So when I hear the word authentic, I think of showing up in a space as who you are, meaning being a level of vulnerability and transparency. So in the case of leadership, or even in the case of cultural humility, right, we all have work to do. It's not about portraying that we have all the answers or pretending we have all the answers. Although I think at times we've been conditioned to, like, you got to show up and fake it till you make it, right? But the reality is that people gravitate towards leaders and people who do the work that they say they do when they're authentic, meaning that they will admit when they make mistakes, learn from their mistakes so that they can get better, And I think that's a high, that is really important when it comes to authenticity. It's not just saying that you have all the answers, because some people will do that. It's about demonstrating or living out what you say you're about. And that's where the authenticity comes in, because we all have work to do. We're all going to make mistakes. It's what we do with those mistakes that separate exceptional leaders from effective leaders or even novice leaders. And that's what I think the current state we're in, the instability we're in, requires of us.
Yeah. And you said something really meaningful there, which I think we've all felt. There's some fear in saying the wrong thing, and I'm supposed to know everything. You know, I come from HR, where HR was in charge of inclusion efforts, but it really has to be everybody playing a role.
Yes.
So I'm curious for you. I mean, that was kind of the impetus of where I started HR, DEI. Like, personally, I'm very passionate about it because it's also me and my story, you know, the intersection of where I'm at. But why is this work important for you?
Well, so I would say there's a couple of reasons. There may be more than a couple, but as I start talking, that might change. But one of the main reasons that I think this work is important for me is because I want our world to be in a better place. And the world sounds big, right? Obviously, it's a huge thing, right? Global. So it's drilling down to the micro level and what I can actually influence in the work that I do, in the organization I may find myself, or the people that I work with. And so it's important for me because I want to change society, and that starts a little at a time, right? It's controlling what you can control and influencing what you can influence, with the aspirational goal that it's going to impact the people that you're working with, as well as then the people that they work with, right? And so it's important to me because I want society to get better. I want to be able for us to have conversations that are not polarizing, even though there may be topics that are polarizing, but it's about showing up authentically and being who you are and being curious to learn more about where that other person is coming from. So it's important to me because I want society to change, and I want to leave this place a better place. I want to leave a legacy. I want people to have an impact in the work that they do, the lives that the people they interact with. And to me, that starts with me first, self-awareness, and then building out. So it's not just about me, although that's important, but it has to build out into the organization and ultimately the communities that we reside in, whether that's your faith community, your family, your volunteer organization, your coaching chapter, whatever it may be. So you build out, but it starts with you.
Thank you for saying that. And yes, the world feels big, especially right now. We're not going to get into it, even though we can if we feel like it. But there's a lot happening. We're both in LA too. So there's just a lot happening. And I've heard that, unfortunately, where, so many people just feel stuck, feel like, what can I do? What difference can I make? So when we start to think about this bigger societal impact, it just takes one conversation, one person, one, moment of curiosity, of empathy to change someone's world. So even when you feel like, what can I do? What can I really, what impact can I make? And I'm sure you've had those moments. I for sure have had those moments where I'm like, I'm just one person. But now we're two people here having this conversation, right. And whoever's hearing this hopefully is going to share this as well and have these types of conversations where I'm like, let's get curious. Let's slow down. One person at a time can make a difference, even when it feels like the world is so, so big and we don't even know where to start. Start with conversations, meaningful conversations.
Correct. Yeah.
So we've mentioned this term, cultural humility. And I know that that's the base of a lot of your work and what you do. Can you define that for us and share a little bit more of, again, like, where is this coming from? What do you do with this idea of cultural humility?
Yeah. So cultural humility is the ability to navigate the complexity, I guess, in action. It's the ability to navigate the complexity that comes with creating a sense of belonging and the psychological safety that you want to create for your community around you and the organization that you serve in. the way I define culture humility, and it's based on the work of two healthcare professionals, Trevelyan and Garcia, who have a very academic definition, which I'm not going to read to you. But it's the ability to become, or to develop the self-awareness and understanding yourself, particularly how you engage with others around you. That then leads to that redressing the power imbalances. So self-awareness, self-critique, redressing the power imbalances, and then ultimately organizational change. And the self-awareness and self-critique piece, I believe, has three components. One is getting clear on the biases that we hold, getting clear about who we are as our cultural identities, or the cultures that we belong to, and then gaining other awareness, or learning more about the people around us and how we interact with them, right? Cross culture, across socioeconomic status, across generation. And that ultimately is going to lead to that redressing the power imbalances, because as we start to share our lived experiences and hear others' lived experiences, we're going to recognize that there's some power imbalances that exist in our world, in our organization, and in our families. And then we're going to, I wholeheartedly, and I've seen it, you're compelled to want to redress those power imbalances so that you can retain your talent. You can help people feel like they belong. All about, having those deep, meaningful relationships and knowing who that other person is, which may mean that you need to advocacy, or share their stories, or, get really, have a deep relationship with someone. And then ultimately that's going to lead to organizational change, which is the heavier lift, because organizations do not turn on a dime. It takes time. But for me, the definition of cultural humility is developing this posture of openness and recognizing that you're not always going to have all the answers. So it's not about saying the right thing. It's about engaging that meaningful conversation where you show up as yourself, and having that space where you can be yourself as well as that other person, which may mean that you're going to say some things that are probably not going to be received well at times, but having that space where you're going to be able to learn from each other. This idea, and I talk about this in the book, is seeking to understand versus seeking to convince. It's not about convincing the other person's wrong and that you're right. It's about having a conversation where you leave that conversation with a better understanding of who they are, which may lead to some change in you, but it may not. But that's okay. I learned more about Lindsay in this conversation, and I have a better perspective on why Lindsay believes what she believes. And I may ultimately not agree with it, and that's okay. But I may ultimately like, oh, that makes sense. And maybe I need to change my perspective a little bit. Or maybe Lindsay learns something about me that then causes her to change her perspective, right? And I think that's the importance of, I should say, that's why having meaningful dialogue where curiosity is present, I think, will lead to better, more meaningful conversations, and ultimately to the change that we want to see in ourselves and in the organizations, and ultimately the world.
I love it. It's funny because I'm sure, again, we both have said this many times, and I know many, many people say this, like, I don't know why they don't see it my way, or how do they not see it? Because they don't. We all have different lived experiences, backgrounds, cultures, education, all of it, right? So we need to understand that we're going to see things in very different ways. So we have to meet in the middle. Be aware of our biases. And I want to put a pin on that because I want to ask a question there. Listen, like truly, truly listen. And I love what you said of like, stop trying to convince, because you may never convince someone to see things your way, because they won't, but you can listen and you can learn, and you can make an impact by having people feel heard.
Yeah, that's it.
Ooh, biases. So it's interesting. Again, this is a major, major topic, and I love to teach self-awareness, awareness of bias. And one thing I always say is we are all biased. Even AI is biased. So how, there's this idea that like, I don't want to come off biased because what does it say about me?
Yeah.
we need to acknowledge the bias. We need to know that it exists.
Mm-hmm.
But how can somebody, like, what does this look like in day to day? How can someone actually start to uncover what some biases might be?
Yeah, I that's a good question. And in a recent article I wrote for a Fast Company, I talk about this because that is people have a question: how do I unearth these? Right?
Yeah.
It's first it takes a desire to be honest with yourself, right? And we have to understand that biases exist; they are present. For some of us, some biases are more prevalent than others. Mm-hmm. But it's first getting clear on what those biases are. So that could be as simple, although not that simple, but as simple as taking an assessment, right? So you take the implicit bias association test that Harvard puts out that's available for free, where you can take an assessment to identify some of the biases you may have, to help you then, once you recognize those biases, is then what you do with those. And I tell my clients this, I tell people when I do workshops that it's about finding people you trust who can be honest with you, mm-hmm. and that you would actually hear them and what they have to say, right? So it could come back with, you could come say, hey, this assessment says I have a certain type of bias. Is that true? Like, what are you seeing? And then that person hopefully will say, one, they could say, no, that's actually not you. And that's okay too. Or like, no, that's definitely you. And then once you receive that, like, oh, okay, the bias is never going to go away, but there are things we can do to mitigate its impact, right? So that we can recognize when it starts happening and that we need to do something about it because it's starting to rear its ugly head, right? Yeah. Our brains are wired to be biased, right? We're wired because our brain, the world is very complex. There's a lot of decisions we have to make, and sometimes we want to make quick decisions. So it's kind of like what Malcolm Gladwell was talking when he wrote Blink, right? Our mm-hmm. brain creates shortcuts. And so what may have been true, like something that happened 10 years ago, we've held on to that as truth. And that's sometimes means that we have certain biases towards certain ethnic groups, certain cultural groups, gender, socioeconomic status. And the reality is that those aren't true. And if we recognize they're not true, then what are they? And then what can we do to mitigate its impact? So one is as simple as that. The other is to ask for feedback, and be open and honest about the kind of feedback you want, and then have a willingness to receive that feedback, right? And that's where the scary point is for people. Like, well, yes. I really don't want to know, or if I do, what am I going to do with that? And that's where it could be coaching. It could be, depending on how embedded the bias is and how like how toxic it might be. It could be therapy. Mm-hmm. But it's beginning to recognize those biases that is going to help us be the leaders that we desire to be, or be the professionals we desire to be. The other thing that I do, Lindsay, is before I walk into a coaching session or before I show up in a workshop or a speaking engagement, is I ask myself, what biases do I need to check myself on? Mm-hmm. So that I can name them and put them out in the ether, in the world. Like I can oh yes, I just reminded myself, I need to be good about making those in the meeting that are introverted, not isolating them, or not, I want introverts to share ideas. I have a bias towards people who tend to speak up more than those that don't. Yeah. What can I do to create a space so that people that are introverted can feel more free to share, right? But it's asking myself, what biases do I need to check myself on? And that's helped me recognize them and minimize the impact, because now I've named them and I know that they're there, and that I can then figure out a way to mitigate their impact. But it starts with finding out what those biases are, and then asking myself, okay, how do I mitigate that impact? And that's important work when it comes to that self-awareness piece.
Yeah.
And so I have a bias. The honesty is that I rural versus urban, right? I have some biases or some perceptions of what people from rural communities are like. And the reality that those aren't true. but I've been conditioned to think that. So what do I need to do to retrain my brain so I don't walk in with those biases, and to help me be a better leader if I have to engage or think through how do I lead people from rural communities because they have something to contribute in this particular conversation that I might be having.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And biases pop up everywhere. I think where some people might get a little overwhelmed is like, how do I become aware of all of my biases? It's a continuous journey. It's a continuous learning process. And you have to give yourself some grace too, and give others grace. You know, sometimes uncovering some biases may bring up feelings of a little guilt, a little shame, but shake that off because you're going to lead with curiosity.
Right. That's right. Yeah. The 3 things I talk about in the book of how to develop a posture, or the 3 things it takes to develop a posture of cultural humility. One is a growth mindset.
Yes.
Because you're going to make mistakes, and it's what you do with those mistakes. Learning how to develop deep curiosity, getting curious about other people as well as yourself when you have certain thoughts, and then the ability to, learning how to deeply listen, because we all say we're better listeners than we actually are.
Oh yeah.
and truly listening takes work.
Yes.
And really intentional work, as opposed to just saying, I'm a good listener. The reality is, as I'm reminded constantly by my children and my spouse, that I'm not that great of a listener. And so I need to think about how I show up and making sure that I'm my head's in the right place to listen.
Yeah. Keyword is active on the listening, because it is really hard. We have a lot of internal noise, external noise. But again, another skill that we can continuously develop.
Yes.
And the last thing I'll say on bias, I want to jump to another question because our time is flying. It can be big and small. It pops up everywhere. Just receive it, see it. You know, I saw in your bio that you're a Dodger fan. Me too. So I already had an affinity bias towards you. Like, yes, I can talk to Joel, but there's another team that they shall not be named, a little cheater energy, that I have a bias against, right? So we definitely have biases all over the place. Just recognize them, know them, and don't let them get in your way of being that truly authentic leader.
That's right.
Awesome. So back to this idea of, you know, putting this into action, putting this into kind of real life terms, because again, in the workplace, we're so focused on our craft, what we do, heads down, we're in our own world. What's one small action that somebody can take this week to get started on really learning about cultural humility, listening to each other? What's one small thing that they can do that's accessible and easy?
Yeah, I think it's asking yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I have no awareness of what cultural humility, 10 being I totally am culturally humble, right? Where are you on that scale? Okay. So 2, 3, whatever, and then, or 5. And then in the next 6 weeks or 2 months, where would you like to be on that scale? So I want to be a 9 and I'm at a 5. Then the follow-up question is, what would it take for me to get from a 5 to a 9? Okay. So that's 1. So take a self-assessment, right? As easy as that. And then once you know what you want to do and where you want to be, is think about, okay, what are some things that I can do to start becoming more aware of my biases, becoming more aware of the people that are around me that are maybe different than me, that don't have the same affinity that I do, and putting yourself in the spots. But the initial thing is to take a self-assessment piece, as easy as the 1 to 10 scale question, and then create space to reflect. Here's the other thing you can do is think of 2 or 3 people around you that you trust, that would give you honest feedback, to ask them some questions about how you're showing up, particularly now that you understand what cultural humility is. And the other thing I want to stress is that it's a journey.
Yes.
There's not an end point. And this frustrates a lot of my clients sometimes. Like, just tell me what to do and I can do it. The reality is things will continue to change. Society continues to change. So you have to be nimble and flexible enough to understand. You have to understand that, so that you know that it's a lifelong process, that it's not about checking a box, dotting an I or crossing a T, or getting a certificate. It's about a journey, and that takes time. I think, and I relate that to leadership, because depending on who's listening, right? We're all leaders, and we know with leadership is it requires constant work on ourselves. It's not that you can say, I attended a conference, I am the best leader I can possibly be. Right? Because there's always something that happens, or you change you change to a new organization, so things are morphing and changing. You have to do that as well. Just like that's the same kind of work that comes with developing a posture of cultural humility, which is a key aspect of exceptional leadership.
I love it. One thing you said too, of it's not just checking a box, it's a continuous journey. And I think that's what a lot of people got wrong about DEI in general. Right. Yes. And for a different time, but I wrote this thing early in my journey where somebody hit me with this idea that like DEI is just a buzzword, and was like very dismissive of it. But I'm like, oh, it's because you don't really understand what it means. You don't understand the intention behind it. It's not about checking a box. It's the awareness and understanding that we are all different, all come from different backgrounds. Some of us literally did not have access to certain places. So recognizing that, and then finding that opportunity to be inclusive by listening, by having cultural humility, by wanting to learn and wanting to extend that grace to others and ourselves.
Yeah, because you're going to make mistakes, right? That's the growth mindset. And you have to understand that mistakes will happen. And like I said earlier, it's more than just a cliche. It's what you do with those mistakes.
Yes.
Right. And also the space that you create for others to make mistakes. And I'm not saying you don't hold people accountable, because sometimes you need to, but you can also do that with dignity and with respect, but also create a learning opportunity for people to say, okay, what can I learn from this so it doesn't happen again? And that's where that growth mindset comes in.
Love it. I feel like we could talk forever, and we have so much to continue to say, but want to make sure that people know, if they want to learn more, where can they find more about you, your book, any other events that might be coming up that they can hear you speak?
Yeah. So the call to action, because as you know, right, is you can find out more about my book at dearwhiteleader.com. You could download the first chapter. So if you want to read the first chapter before you decide, I want to buy this, or it's not for me, and that's okay, right? I also have a cultural humility assessment tool on the website that you can download. That's where you can go. As far as learning more about like keeping track of what I'm up to, LinkedIn is great for that. And then if you really want to dive into the services that I offer, it is apoyocoaching.com. But dearwhiteleader.com will get you started, and then kind of get a feel for this whole concept of cultural humility, and then determine kind of what the next steps are for you.
Beautiful. And I have to ask, and I think I asked this when we first met, I'm like, Dear White Leader, quite the bold title. Yes. And personally, like, I wouldn't, immediately pick it up, because I'm like, oh, you're not, in case you didn't know, I'm not white. But curious, who is this book for, and why that title?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So the title is meant to be provocative and to get people that the target audience is white leaders that want to get better at leading diversity work, but don't know where to start, or are feeling stuck, or creating a sense of belonging, but don't know where to start, or are feeling stuck. The secondary audience, and when you write a book, those of you I know all of you are going to write books, is you need to have I know Lindsay's going to write a book. You need to have a primary audience, right? You can't say your book's for everybody, because then it's for nobody. Right. So the primary audience is white leaders who want to get better. People who are already on this journey, not people who want to be convinced. But the secondary reader is any leader who wants to develop a posture of cultural humility. And because every concept of the book relates to every leader, no matter what your cultural background, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, because all the concepts are applicable to all. But the primary audience, and why I wrote the book, is for white, mid to senior level leaders who want to get better at this work, but are feeling stuck or don't know where to start.
Beautiful. And thank you for sharing all of this. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to put our contact information in the comments as well, so you know where to find Dr. Joel or myself. But appreciate you. We'll talk soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Have a good one.